What is going on, everyone? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics. I think we got a pretty interesting video today. Got a few different topics that I wanted to talk about. Thought I'd put them all together into one video. I'm going to start with this one right here. So this is a huge book. A lot of you probably are familiar with this book. This one is up for sale right now on the Heritage Signature Auction that kicks off on January 9th. So clearly a big book. It is a restored copy, but still first appearance of Captain America, first appearance of Bucky, classic cover with Captain America punching Hitler on the cover. It is an 8.0. Restoration is an A2. So we'll take a little closer look here. An A2 means professional. That's the A. And the 2 means that it's a slight to moderate amount. Then we look at the note here. Pretty cool. Jack Kirby authenticated autograph with inscription on page 1. And then restoration includes small amount of color touch on cover, pieces added. And so this one really caught my attention because I was like, oh, hey, like that's restoration that could potentially be removed. And so if this is an 8.0, I mean, maybe it gets knocked down to like a 5 or a 4 or whatever it might be, maybe even better. And so, but could still get back to a blue label. But I was curious what the inscription was. And so I thought, hey, I'll go check out the grader's notes. And so went down and they actually had the grader's notes here. And I see this, all 3 edges trimmed, staples replaced, spine and centerfold reinforced. And I was like, what is going on? That is not on the label. And that type of stuff is always on the label to make it very clear what type of restoration has been done to this book. And, but also we can see that we don't have the information about what was actually written on the inscription, but that's when I saw this and I had never seen this before. And I'm sure there are other books out there that have this. It's when there's a lot of stuff that has to be put on the cover. I just personally, and I've looked at a lot of books, I haven't come across this before. And so I figured that this is something that I might want to point out just for anybody else out there, that you have to keep your eye open for this. So what you see here is you have this in small little text here. It says over. What it's telling you to do is to go to the back of the label because that's where the remainder of the restoration notes are. Just something I haven't ever seen. And so if we go to the back of the label, it says pieces added to cover, reinforce, staples replaced, all 3 edges trimmed. All the worst stuff on the back. Now, I don't think that was intentional or anything. It's just, it is funny to me that the things that would ultimately make it so this book could not get back to a blue label are on the back. That's the staples replaced and all 3 edges trimmed. And the trimming is the biggest one because that's typically the type of restoration that people dislike the most. But I just thought that was interesting. But just something to keep your eye open for is that if you have a restored book and you see, look for this over, because that could have that additional information that, I'd never seen it before. So at first I just assumed this was all that was done to this book. And if somebody's going through these quickly, even if it's an expensive book like this, sometimes people don't always take that extra leap of research, and they could think that this is a book that could get back to a blue label, and it cannot. Absolutely cannot. Now, it's still a great looking book. It's a restored book. It's going to go for a lot of money. I mean, we can see here it's already at $66,000. But this is a book that cannot get back to a blue label. So just something to be aware of, that sometimes those notes travel over to the back cover, and it's just something I haven't personally ever seen before. Right, now we're going to go to the next topic. This is from one of the Facebook groups that I'm in, CGC Comics Fans. I got to be a little careful here because this cover has some nudity on it, and so I'm going to try to make sure I don't show that. So this was a comment here where they said, let's say I stumbled across a good-looking copy of this book earlier this year. This is one of 2 9/8s on Census. All raws on eBay are beat up and selling for over $100. If mine comes back at 9.8, I want to sell max. And so what this book is, and we'll go over to look at that because there's 2 versions of this book, one that shows some nudity and one that doesn't. And so this is the post he's talking about. And it's this book here, Torrid Affairs #2. And so there is one version of this that the woman's top is see-through, and then there's another version here where it's not. And it's actually a pretty interesting book because it's cover art from Matt Baker. But this book is, you can see here, it's from 1989. Matt Baker passed away well before that. And so what it actually is, and they've got a description down here where it says, this is the Matt Baker cover art was taken from an interior panel of a story entitled My Dangerous Pastime, originally printed in Teenage Romances number 20 by St. John in 1952. So it's an interior page that got made into a cover, and it has Bruce Timm apparently did the kind of like the coloring, is what it sounds like for this. And so this person is asking $8,000. This book has never sold before in a 9.8. And so the person with the post is kind of asking, like, what might this book be worth? And so this is one thing where there are no prior sales. There's no sales in GPA. If you look this one up, if you look it up on Go Collect, there's no sales here. You can see there are a few different issues of this, 1, 2, 3, and 4. All of them have no sales history. But there is one place that you can look for, or actually there's a couple places, I'll say. There's a couple places that you can look for the history of raw books. One of them is Cover Price. It's a service similar to GPA and Go Collect, but they also record raw sales. I don't know for sure if they actually have any of those raw sales or not, but that is an option for raw sales. Another one is this, and this is the eBay, we'll call it the research hub. So if you go in eBay, it doesn't have to be under as a seller. It used to just be limited to sellers, but it's available to anybody with an account now. And you go under product research and you look up Torrid Affairs number 2. You can look up to the last 3 years of sales. And we can see here that this book in raw form sells for anywhere from typically around $50 to $100. It's like a $50 to $75 book. And we can see a recent sale here was $75. And so if I see that, I'm going to think a 9.8 is probably somewhere in the $300 to $500 range at the top end. That's probably where that book is. Now, I realize that this book, and this person is actually selling 2. They're selling the variant and the regular, but that's not, I don't think it's going to add a ton of additional value to this. This person is just throwing a number out there. I'm not criticizing them. It's like there's no prior sales. You know, they've got it at what it is or what they think, you know, maybe they can sell it for. But I think the way that you would sell this book, because the person is asking, like, how would you sell this for the best price? This is the type of book that with no sales history, I would probably auction it. I would not auction it on eBay. I think on eBay, you're going to have a lot of trouble with a book like that. I think it's just obscure enough that you're probably not going to have a lot of luck there. I would probably try to send it someplace like Heritage, because, I mean, one thing that helps it is that Matt Baker sells really well on Heritage. Now, that is vintage Matt Baker. I have no idea how that would transfer to something like this, but you might get lucky and catch someone that's interested in it and wants that 9.8. Maybe they have that issue number 20 of Teenage Romances, you know, that has the interior page, and they thought this would be something cool to have along with it. But I still think 300 to 500 is probably where it would go. Who knows? Maybe it goes huge. I have no idea. But given that raws go around $50 to $75, I think that that's a pretty reasonable range for a 9.8. But let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think about that. But that's about where I would put it. Now, the person also asked if, you know, if theirs came back a 9.8. Someone in the comments in there commented that they thought it was like a 9.4 to a 9.6 when they looked at it. And I agree. That's just based on the front cover. I don't know what the back cover looks like. Front cover, you could see a few clear spine ticks. So I think 9.4, 9.6 is probably what it would get. Probably not a 9.8, which might have trouble as well. You know, you might get, like, if you don't get a 9.8, maybe you only get the 75 or $100. It might not even be worth grading. So just something to consider there as well. Now, the last one that we're going to talk about here. This was a post where the person says, seems like I have a rare book here, 4 only graded. And for some reason, mine is not on the Census. Been keeping an eye on eBay for any sale. Haven't seen a raw one for sale, and I've been looking for a year. Only sale on GPA was in 2017 for a 6.0. So this is one of those things where, so the first thing, I would not call this a rare book. This is one of those situations I've talked about before where rare on Census does not mean rare. It might mean rare, but in this case, very likely does not. So in order for a book to be rare, and you kind of take the Census seriously for that, is it has to be a high value book and also be rare so that there's lots of motivation for people to get it graded. And so in this case, this is a book that is not a high value book. It's not a cheap book necessarily, but it's not a high value book. And so people just don't get the book graded. It's just not worth it. They would just sell it raw or whatever, keep it ungraded, not worth necessarily the grading costs. There are a couple interesting things here, though, is they point out that it's not on the census. And yeah, when you look it up, it's like, here's that book, 0 and 2.5, 4 and higher grades. So, I mean, somebody in the comments there told the person they need to reach out to CGC because this, based on the number, this was probably graded earlier this year. I think he said like 6 months ago. So probably earlier this year, maybe during Bengate, but it was probably graded earlier this year and it absolutely should be on the census, but for some reason it isn't. And so they need to get that corrected, especially when there's only 4, like a fifth of the census now. So it definitely should be on there. But so that's one thing. Like, it's just kind of weird that that one's not on the census. So again, don't ever take the census as gospel. We know people crack and resubmit, all that kind of stuff. And in this case, there's a book that is clearly graded, clearly in the person's hands, and is not on the census. And you can see that here, just like this is that actual census page, and there's no book there in a 2.5. Now, the other thing is pricing this book. And so he's right. In GPA, you've got House of Mystery number 36 and a 6.0 sold 7 years ago for $90. I mean, that 2.5 is probably, graded worth like $50. It's probably like a $40 to $50 book, 25 to 50, like somewhere. I mean, it's probably like $20 to $50, like somewhere in that range. It's not a cheap book. I mean, it is technically still a golden age book, 1955, but it's not like a super high dollar book. Also, if you go over to eBay, you can see that there are a couple for sale. And so I did a search for House of Mystery number 36, 1955. The thing I always find I have to do, or eBay doesn't filter correctly, is I also sort by price, whether it's lowest or highest first, then it actually filters the way it's supposed to. And I don't know why it pulled in some of these. Maybe somebody has something in the comments, or like in their description. But you can see here, there are 2 copies right now that are available. I mean, these people have them listed for $200 and $192. I don't really think that's what they're worth. But that's my take. It's like a 3.0. They have it as a 3.0 for 192. You never know. I mean, maybe somebody would buy that, but I still think maybe like $30 to $50 is probably about where that book is at. But that's up to the buyer and the seller to price it however they want. Obviously, it's not a book that sells very often, so it's not a high demand book. But if somebody's trying to put together a House of Mystery run, it might be a little difficult to come by. But this would at least give you some place to start. Remember, asking prices are not really how you should value books. People can ask anything they want. But with this one, there's no prior history for it. So what you might consider doing is you might look at maybe other books around it to see if there have been more recent sales. Like, let's look at number 37. We had a 5.5 that sold for $384, but that was a pedigree as well. Then let's look at like number 38. We had a 6.0 sell for $139 just in September. So I feel like that kind of goes with my maybe $50 is the price for that for a 2.5 or $40. And then let's check out number 35, like one right before, see if there's something there. No recent sales at issue 35. Let's look at issue 34. No real recent sales, 6.5 at 216. I mean, to me, this all kind of justifies the price that I came up with, but that's how you might approach that, is if you don't have any real recent sales for that specific book, since it's not a key, just look at some issues around it, and it's probably going to give you a reasonable idea of where you could value that book. But those were the 3 topics I wanted to talk about. We had Captain America. Keep an eye out for those label notes that move to the back cover. Then we had this Torrid Affairs number 2. Kind of the warning there. People can ask whatever they want. Doesn't mean that's what it's worth. The raw pricing probably will help a lot more with this one. And that's where, using this product research tool is a great tool. And then the last one here, rare on census does not necessarily mean rare. And then just a couple little things here with how you can, some tips that you can use to price those out. But yeah, CGC, if you're watching, fix that. They did tell him to reach out to them because obviously they can't just add it in because maybe the person, it's an old picture and they've cracked it out. And so you need some type of proof maybe from that person to CGC, but this is the type of stuff we never like to see, just like that stuff to all be as accurate as possible, since we know there's already some inaccuracies built in because of people cracking and resubmitting books. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe button, notification bell, and I will see you on the next video.